Wish you were one of those influencers with raving fans who binge on your every word, consume all your content, buy everything you have to sell, and demand even more? Then stay tuned while Authority Magazine columnist and BuzzFeed contributor Tracy Hazard shares strategies, tips, and tactics from top videocasters, podcasters, authors, and social influencers on creating that bingeable factor. Now, let's join Tracy as she explores how to rise above all the digital noise with the binge factor.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the binge factor. I know we had a kind of unusual episode last week when we were interviewing Mark Hirschberg, who was not a podcast host, and we almost only have podcast hosts here on the binge factor. But this week, we're back to having podcast hosts as our guest, and I'm excited for this one. Andrea Johnson. Stand Tall and Own It is the podcast. She's known as the Intentional Optimist. That's her business. I love that title. It just makes me smile, and I love the words together. I am going to put intention into being optimistic about something. And, Tom says that Tom's my husband and partner at Podetize. He's always said, sometimes I used to be a glass half empty kind of girl, but I've worked really hard to be intentional about my focus on the outside world, about my focus on looking at things from a more visionary standpoint, from a more like, where are things going to go? And really, that's an optimistic view. But it also requires you to do something that's right in Andrea's title, stand tall and own it, right? You're going to have to own it because sometimes things just don't go the way they're supposed to. And in podcasting, that happens to us all the time. So let's talk about Andrea Johnson. I'm so excited about her. She empowers executives and founders to lead with authenticity, conviction, and confidence so that they can make a positive impact on their lives, organizations, and their communities. She works with leaders who feel stifled, who haven't grown their influence the way that they thought they would. So they're not achieving the current level of influence that they wish they would, that they feel that they should. And she facilitates improving communication, corporate culture within teams and organizations, in addition to improving yourself. She loves to work on and focus equipping female leaders to define a new culture by trusting their own ability to think critically, creatively, and effectively as leaders. I love that idea that we can make it our own, right? We can own it. We can change our future. We don't have to do it the same old way that it was done before. So let's hear from Andrea Johnson. Stand tall and own it, our intentional optimist. Andrea, I'm so glad to have you here. First off, I do love the name of your show, Stand Tall and Own It. I love that,
Excellent.
Especially not being a super tall person in like stature. But I feel like that's something that you have to do. You have to stand tall and own it. So I love that title. But I also really love the title of your company, The Intentional Optimist, the title of your URL, your website, The Intentional Optimist. I love that. I have to say, for most of my life, I didn't consider myself an optimist. But that has changed in recent years, maybe with age, I don't know. But I do love the intentional part of it. I think that's so important, that everything we do is with intention. So let's talk about that. What was your intention starting the podcast?
It's very meta. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here. I know everybody says that, but I really mean it. I'm intentional about these things. So when I turned 50, we lost my mother to a 17-year breast cancer battle. If you go to my website, you'll see some of that story. And I sat down to say, what do I want to stand for? Because I'm fairly certain that where I am today is not where I want to end up. And one of the things that she was very good at is she had that sanguine personality that we talk about, the bubbly person. I compare her to a bottle of champagne, and she could just do that every time she entered a room. She would enter and people would go, Judy, like Norm on Cheers. And I too sort of considered myself an optimist, but not really. I'm an Enneagram 6. So by definition, I'm a realist, and I'm always looking for the worst thing that could happen. And then I mitigate for that, right? I'm not a worst case scenario thinker, but I realized that I was not being optimistic in a way that was actually benefiting me. I could say, well, I hope, or wouldn't it be nice? But one of the things that I am is intentional. I do everything with intention. And I wanted to start a business, and I wanted to have the name be something along the lines of something to do with sanguine. And all my friends were like, nobody uses that language anymore. You can't say
What does that mean?
What does that mean? And it's from the old 4-quadrant personality types of the choleric and the sanguine and the phlegmatic and the whatever you see, nobody remembers.
Right.
And so I said, you know what? I don't do anything without thinking about it. I don't do anything without having a purpose behind it. I'm not a wanderer. And so I said, you know what? I think intentional optimism is where I want to go, because this was right before COVID. So this is 2018, 2019. And there was this whole pushback against toxic positivity and toxic optimism. And it's not that. I don't think you can truly be optimistic if you haven't seen the dark side of like every situation, right?
I think that's really interesting. Yeah. This idea of like foils, right? In writing,
Yes.
right? You have to have good and evil in order to see it. You're right about that. And I think that also does, you're come with age, because I said, I like didn't consider myself an optimist, especially in my younger years, but I do think that in comparison, I am now.
Yeah. And I think with age comes an understanding that, or the ability to look back on the things that have gone right in your life, even if you've made poor choices, even if you've changed direction 10 times, you can still look back and say, you know what, I'm still standing and it's okay. And the definition of having optimism is being able to have hope in the future. So if you don't have hope in the future, you're truly not an optimist. But if you can at all say, I have hope that something's going to be different or better, then you can call yourself an optimist.
I love that. I think that that's great. So how did that lead to the podcast? How did that like spark of like, oh, I'm going to start a podcast come for you?
You know, I'm just going to tell you, I'm 57, and during COVID, I was still working for the University of Virginia. I spent 25 years in upper level education, graduate level education, and administration operations and management. And I was managing people, and I did a lot of work with research administration, so clinical trials. I understand a lot of those kinds of things. And when COVID hit, because I'm the person who thinks ahead and sees the worst case scenario, I had saved all these laptops. And so I was ready to move my entire team off campus, right? We were the first, there was 10 departments in the Department of Medicine or divisions, and we were the first to move everybody off and to home. And, you know, at the time in March of 2020 or 2020, we didn't know what we were doing. So it was impressive, but because of that, I was working from home way before anybody else. And I had already gotten my coaching certification, and I was working with I was trying to use it on my staff. Don't do that. Because I mean, there are ways in which departmentally they wanted some help with some coaching, but it just doesn't work in a bigger institution. They're looking for maintaining the status quo, which is management. And I'm interested in leadership and change. And so I was out working in my backyard, listening to a podcast to this woman who's now my speaking coach, Heather Sager, shout out. And she literally in the podcast said, "Is your next stage a podcast?" And I thought, and I'm out there by myself.
The voice is coming saying,
yes,
start a podcast.
Earbuds in my ears. I stood up from pulling weeds and said, yes, it is my next. That's my stage, because I can do keynotes, you know, but I love the intimacy of having a podcast. And at the time, I knew I had my 6 tenets of intentional optimism, which is where that name came from. And I knew that my business was named that. And so I'm like, I'm going to at least teach some of this stuff, and I'm going to interview women to figure out how this shows up with them. And it became an experiment, and it just started. And my best friend said, "Can I help?" And I said, yes. I would have been one of those who would not have made it past 8 episodes if I did not have her helping me with production. Like,
support is so essential. I'm glad you got that early on. And, you know, you're at the recording of this, you're over 160 episodes. Absolutely amazing. That puts you in an elite group, because, you know, it's really about less than 10% make it past 100.
Yeah.
And that's shocking to me today, because there's so many great voices that need to keep being heard, and you've done that. So I'm so happy for that.
Thank you. Thank you. I will say it doesn't shock me. Having done more than 160, it's some of those are repeats. I'll not lie, right? Some of those are like best ofs because you need a break. But, just getting there, and even there are days when it's just really hard. We can't tell people that it's not, but I appreciate the encouragement because it really is a labor of love. It's something that I want to do and I love to do and that I am dedicated to.
Well, what I find to be your binge factor, so I'm going to just do this early in the episode here, which I don't always do, but it's what I find is really this interesting mix between your topics, lessons, if you want to call them that. It's kind of thought-provoking topics. They're not really you lecturing anyone, which I really do appreciate. And I think that's a big difference. There's a lot of coaches out there who do a lecture instead of let's think about this and let's ponder this. And that's the way you propose your topics. But I also think you must be either you or your team is doing this combining of the right thought-provoking topic and the guest you just had. And so I think that that's a really interesting play on it. So you're actually getting a flow through of the conversation and the thought process. And that is why your show is bingeable.
Thank you very much. It will not surprise you to hear that is intentional.
I was hoping that was what you were going to say, because it seems like it should be, obviously, with your show.
Yes.
And, that's, I think, missing for a lot of people. And that's really when you have a binge factor that's unique to you and it fits your brand of intention in this particular case, that's why people are going to stay subscribed and come back for more.
Well, excellent. Thank you. We will continue with that. And even just this last week, we're recording this, in December, and I'm releasing several episodes on what it means to have how you manage stress and all the different aspects of stress during the holidays. And I had an extra that I recorded from a guest back in June, but I'm like, no, that fits later. And so we're just popping that in this week because I just got finished. The episode that came out was on how you love your body and your food during the holidays. And she is an image coach. And so it just all kind of worked together. So part of that is me, and part of that is my producer and editor who will every once in a while, we have a spreadsheet, and every once in a while she'll say, you've got a lot of episodes on this, but you know what I'm hearing? Da, 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 da. And I'm like, oh, that's great. And so it's just
so you're kind of collaborating. I love that. Yeah.
And, Tracy, that's the way I work with people is I'm very big on collaboration. And so it's nothing for me to collaborate with other podcasters for things or with other business coaches or even businesses in the area. I think collaboration is something that we as women leaders need desperately, and we have not been taught that. It is not in our DNA. It is not in the business structure of post-industrial revolution. That collaboration over competition is extremely important. And therefore, when I even present a topic as this is something to think about, for me to say, this is how it needs to be, would be completely contradictory to every bit of personal growth that I have done personally. And it would be so out of congruence for me that I wouldn't be able to do it. And my goal is to teach women to be critical thinkers, or even just my listeners, women or men, to be critical thinkers, because we're taught, even in school, to recite things back. We're taught this is the way things should be. And the culture that I was raised in was very prescriptive. And I've had to break away from some of that. And some of it has been very difficult, but it's so worth it. So thank you for recognizing that.
Oh, you're welcome. And, here's the thing. I think that there's not enough good information out there on podcasting. And I mean, that's part of what we try to fill here, right?
Yeah.
But, there's not enough. It's so fractured.
Mm-hmm.
And the collabs really work. That's one of the things. We do have a very collaborative and cooperative environment, because if you ask any podcaster, what are you doing over here? They'll tell you, because the more successful podcasts out there, the more the whole ecosystem works for everybody. So they're really big on sharing. And I found that to be so refreshing and attractive to the marketplace. And I think that's what you've been finding too.
Yes. And I mean, I started as soon as I said to the yard outside, yes, that's my next stage. That's what I want to do, is be a podcaster. I was presented with an opportunity to be in a class, and it was literally like 90 days to like start to finish, and everything was done, 10 episodes, boom, it was out the door. And it was all us. I mean, they didn't do anything for us. It was all us, but it was, here's how you get it done. And we just had a really good cohort of people that did that. But getting all of that out the door meant that I met all these different people with different opportunities for different types of podcasting. But one of the things that I love to do is share the information I have. If you listen to 10 of my episodes, you'll hear me say at least twice, when I learn something, I'm going to share it with you, right? Because no information that I gather is proprietary, because obviously I got it from someplace else. So there's no reason for me to hang on to it. And if I want to be able to help the next person along, if it's a coaching client, if it's a younger woman, if it's another podcaster, I am going to share that information. And I have been on so many podcasts as a guest where they didn't even know that you could have 2 separate Zoom recordings for the audio, where they didn't, and I'm like, are you doing this? Because it sounds funny. And they're like, no. And so they're like, oh, I can't believe you shared that with me. I'm like, how could I not? It makes it all better.
It does. It makes everyone better.
And to be able to be in the kind of work that promotes that fills my cup.
Yeah. No, that's so great. Now, you're intentional about your topics. You're intentional about the way you flow the show. How do you go about getting guests that you feel fits your intention?
So for the first 3 years, it was called the Intentional Optimist, Unconventional Leaders. And I took a lot of guests. I actually had some that were not even ready to be a podcast guest, but they had what I was looking for, Tracy, was women with stories that I felt like were leadership stories that they could share, and other women could hear that and go, oh, that's me. I'm really a leader. Because women tend to not think we're leaders. Women tend to think, and it just depends on I come again from an evangelical culture where women are not the leaders. And so for me, that's something that I very much want to showcase. But being able to talk to over 75 women and look at their stories and say, this is a story I want to highlight, it always had some aspect of, I didn't think I was a leader. I became a leader, and this is what I'm doing now. And it was something different every single time. And it was just such a beautiful way to do that. By the time I got to the end of that, it was 100 and some odd episodes, but 3 years worth, basically. I said, I think I'm ready to take this information, and instead of presenting it that way, I'm going to do more solos and more thought-provoking, as you call it, presentations, and share some of the information that I've gained. And I've also been coaching one-on-one for 2 years. So I have a lot of coaching clients that have asked questions and have really serious things that they want to talk about. And I'm realizing that I can share that on the air as well. So any of the interviews that I have on now are extremely intentional. They go very well with whatever it is that I am trying to promote at that moment, or a stream of thought that we've been kind of walking in that direction. And so now they're much more intentional than they were.
I love that you're feeling free to mix it up. I think there's too many podcasters out there who think, okay, this is working, I'm not going to change anything. And they don't. And it really, the audience sort of dies off, and they don't even realize they flatlined, that they could be growing. And this is a way to do it. That's one of the things, my favorite part about podcasting is how flexible it is, right? You can change your cover art. You can change your description, as we were talking about before the call today. You can change all of that, and you can change your guest types. And you should, because you're at a different stage of business. You're at a different stage of marketing. You're at a different stage of the show itself. And your audience that's come along with you is ready for that change too.
Yeah. And it also opens up to new audience. So just the most recent guest I had was a financial coach that I've been talking to for years. But I'm like, you know what? It's time to take that. What is it? What did I call it? The holy trinity of taboo subjects, the money, politics, and religion. I decided to take those and just throw that out and say, nothing's taboo anymore. That's kind of where the stand tall and own it came from. And for somebody like me, that's a big deal. For some people, it's like, what do you mean there's a taboo subject? For me, there were some very taboo subjects. And so having even a money mindset coach on that would present things for women who needed to hear that they didn't need to think in a certain way to actually have good finances. And they could either be a business owner or not a business owner and still take really good charge of their finances was extremely important to have that on my show. So
I love that you're really expanding and thinking about that audience so much in what you're doing. Are you getting feedback? Like, what has the feedback been for you?
what's interesting is that I am doing in my business more local work, and I'm involved in the chamber and all kinds of things. And I have had more local feedback than international or like in general feedback. And I get cold chills thinking about it. At my last chamber businessmen's roundtable meeting, I had a woman come up to me she's also the president of the SHRM chapter here, which is for those you don't know, it's the Society of HR Managers or something. So it's the HR people. And she said, I wanted to ask your permission for something. And I said, what? And she said, well, I've been enjoying your podcast so much. It's helped me so much. I get to write an article every other month. Can I focus on your podcast? Can I promote your podcast? And I said,
please.
well, first, can I hug you? I mean, she's like, well, we don't have a big readership. I'm like, that doesn't matter. You just stood here and told me that what I have done behind a microphone or on a video camera has changed your life, and you want to tell people about it. I can't think of a higher compliment.
I love that. And, it always surprises me when I do go to an event in person and someone goes, I recognize your voice. I'm like, yeah. You do? You're like, I've been listening to you. And it's like, really? I love that. And so that's so great. So it really is helping you all over the place in your business. What other business benefits have you found from your podcast?
I think, honestly, it's more my own personal growth, because I am a verbal processor. I'm like an internal thinker, but an external processor. Like I perfect it out here. And so as I share my ideas and as I talk about things, I realize, 30 episodes when I said that thing, I need to, let's revisit that and let's say it this way, because I've grown a lot. So for me to be able to show up better in my business, podcasting is a great crucible.
Wow, that's great. So let's talk about how you do that. How do you lead listeners and guests to becoming clients? What is that? I'm going to say call to action process, that model that funnel that you flow through.
I'm just going to be honest and say, I don't have a great funnel. I will find a lot of times somebody will listen. I've been on like, as a guest, I've been on like live radio shows and that kind of thing that are podcast episodes. But for me, I have my core values course that I love to start people with, because as a coach, I like to start from the inside out. And so seeing downloads of my freebie and that kind of thing, I also see responses to, believe it or not, from my newsletter, people clicking on my podcast link in my newsletter and then saying, okay, I'm really glad I listened to this. And then they'll move forward with something else.
So you find it kind of like a closing conversation moves faster because they're warming themselves up.
That's a good way to say it. Yes.
Yeah, I can see that. So let's talk a little bit about these core values as the starting point for you. How are you getting them in and working them into sort of do a throw to it on the podcast?
Sure. One of the things that when I changed the title to Stand Tall and Own It and revisited how I was doing each show, I decided I would either highlight a core value aspect or I would highlight what I call the ABCs, which is our assumptions, beliefs, and conditioning. And when I do that, I don't even have to script it because it automatically comes out for me to say, when you understand your core values and you're comfortable in who you are, it is so much easier to confront the conditioning that came up when I talked about this topic. So if you heard when I said something about like holiday stress with your family, if your body went tense or you got sick at your stomach, this is a really good opportunity for you to take the core value exercise, look at what's important to you, and then say, where am I conditioned for this to actually be in conflict with my core values? So it's almost more of a teaching opportunity as a call to action, but I find that is the most natural way to share it.
It's really a support. That's what you're doing. Here's additional resources, additional support. Here's a way for you to
Yes.
explore this further. It's an invitation. It is not a, hey, take my course, right? You're not putting them into the course to begin
It
with.
doesn't feel right to me. I mean, at the very beginning, you said part of what I do is it's collaborative, and it's like I put things out here for you to consider. And I shared with another interviewer recently that I don't stand on the path and yank people onto the path. I shine a big light on the path. And I invite people in. I did 25 years worth of work trying to make people do stuff. I can't do that anymore. I have a kid who's about to turn 15. I can't even make him do anything. So what I've learned is that it's so much better to share with people the options they have that are available to them, and say, this is available to you, whether you take it or not. And I'm here to walk you through it. And that seems to work really well.
I love that kind of thinking about this. This is just saying, let this be a natural flow through. It's going to happen because they're listening to you. They're binging on you. They're starting to really naturally say, what else? What else is here? What else does Andrea have? What else is available to me? And you're just naturally flowing and saying it without pushing it. And I think that's a big deal. Now, let's talk a little bit about the way you promote your show. So, I mean, I'm sure you're doing really well nurturing your existing client base, your existing audience, and the newsletter subscribers that you have. But how are you reaching people that don't know you yet? What does your outreach look like on social and in other places?
Honestly, right now, you've caught me in a down moment.
You know what, Andrea, you are not alone. I'm asking this question because I want others to hear that they're not alone in the same
good.
Because
we started, for the longest time, we were doing social media like every single day, and finding that it really just wasn't getting anything. It was a lot of work for no return. And so we've started focusing on changing the name, and like we talked, fixing the description and looking for the right day to release it, and then doing some collaborations with others. But as far as promoting it, I need to focus on existing client base and nurturing the list, because for us right now, it just feels like social media doesn't really do anything. So I welcome completely what you have to say in that area, if you've got any tips.
Oh, I wish I could just like say, oh, magic wand, let's make Facebook work for you. And it doesn't work like that. And I'm going to be honest. Look, every year at this time of year that we're recording this is the time that I walk my clients through that social media analysis conversation. Okay. And I don't do it like the social media planners out there, the ones who this is their job. I do it from are you feeling the return? Are you feeling the conversation happening? Are you feeling engagement anywhere? If that's not happening, then this has to change for you, because otherwise it's too much work for too little return.
Right.
Now, there's a part of, I call it, because I'm older like you are. So I in a week and a half after recording this, I turned 54. So yeah. So let's put us out for us women in 50s.
Yes.
And so, I'm frustrated by all the work I have to do, right? Like it's a lot, right? And you can't always control all that. And I don't want to not be authentic on Facebook and Twitter and all these places, but I have to look at it as I do need to be alive and posting. And that's my 80s song, alive and kicking, alive and posting. I am alive and posting in places. So we like to put things on autopilot. And that's the decision that we make at the end of each year, as we say, are we going to continue with Twitter? That is our big question we're asking right now. Are we going to continue at all with Twitter? Is it benefiting us? And I have to look at it from a technical standpoint as well as a sort of relationship building standpoint, engagement standpoint. Mm-hmm. And if I take something out, I might actually harm my website or harm my business. And I have to double check that. Right. So that is something when I say, I'm going to get rid of Twitter, I go and say, should I? Right. Well, should I get rid of it in a way that requires any active work for me? And that's the decision for Twitter we came to this year, is that it does so much from our website search engine optimization. It does a lot there because we put in tweetables, which are quotes that highlight it. It breaks up the blog for us. But by clicking them and sharing them out, we're giving ourselves search engine optimization on Google.
Mm.
And that's really important to me. That's where I get a
Yeah.
lot of business. So I
Okay.
can't harm that. So I said, okay, well then we'll still keep the tweetables and we'll still have to keep a Twitter account that it tweets to, right? Like,
Mhm.
so we have to keep that. But do we have to do more than that? No.
Right.
So every time we post, we hit 5 tweets and we're done for the week. That's it.
Mm.
Nobody
Just
has
all
to
at
do
one
any work.
time, like
We
a
just
blast.
click them. Go, yeah, we do a five tweet blast and we're done. That's
So
how we do it.
did
So
a
it's
little bit of
easy.
this. Yeah, we did a little bit of this, and it's actually very reassuring. When we switched things in September to Stand Tall and Own It, and one of them was I get a lot of traffic on LinkedIn, so I kind of went in a little bit more on LinkedIn, and I get pretty good traffic on Instagram. So we keep Instagram kind of doing that. I'm devoting a little bit more time to YouTube, and Threads is really more for me personally, but I noticed I was trying to do all the things. I was trying to put stuff on Pinterest. Facebook. I have lots and lots of friends, and I even have a good number of following, but I just don't get a lot of anything off Facebook. So it's like, we'll put them on my business page and, we put it up there, it's there, but that's a good thing to be reminded of. I do have tweets that I could use. And I do have a Twitter account that is just kind of languishing.
But any of the profiles, any of them, you can think about doing that, putting them some kind of auto scheduling where it's just taking something that you're already producing that's already a part of your podcast and, or something you're using on LinkedIn. And now you're just going to send it over to Instagram or Facebook, right? And you're using the same thing somewhere so that there isn't more work. It's just simply copy and schedule. And
that's what we do.
You know, but this is that time of year where I think about these things. And so I'm, this is good for you to contemplate this at this time. But the reality is if you're not feeling the engagement, it's probably not there.
Right.
And that's important to understand, right?
Yeah.
And then 97% of what's going on out there is paid. So you're competing against paid. And if you're not going to do it for 3%, that's going to be hard. So that's why you also have to think about, where can I put my energy? Where can I put the value that I bring in the world? And if it's your existing community, creating raving fans where they're going to recommend you to other people, they're going to share your show, someone's going to write an article about you, like this is where you should spend your energy. And you're doing that fantastically. So, I'm glad that you're thinking through the intention of what you're doing. And it's not like you shouldn't experiment. The whole thing started as one.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So find your next experiment. Where do you want to play? What do you want to try? What engages you? And then let those other things go.
Well, thank you. That's
there you go.
It's real easy to just get caught up in that. And, I do this with my coaching clients. It's like, do you need a permission slip for this? It's like, yes, I need a permission slip. Thank you for my permission slip.
There you go. I love that. I love that we can collaborate back and forth and coach each other. That's so wonderful. Well, Stand Tall and Own It. You switch the name, and that's the kind of the last thing I want to touch on here before we go, but you switch the name, and that's obviously intentional. What was the purpose of that, and how is that going to carry through into next year?
The purpose was to make it a little bit more clear about what I was doing with the podcast. And for me, I'm not quite 5'2", and so there's a little bit of a play. Yay! I love petite women. We're way more powerful than people expect, and there's a little bit of a play on that. But for me, being able to say, having come from where I came from, and talking to women who are also playing all the right games and following all the right rules, it's okay to stand up tall and be, people say the tallest blade of grass gets cut first. That's okay, right? Because we grow, and there's a reason for that. And it doesn't always happen. Sometimes my son misses tons of blades of grass. So, it's okay to do that. And I want to make sure that I promote the kind of courage that I want to live. And so that's what I am trying to promote in the podcast, is being able to say, you get to stand tall and own all of this. All of this is good. All of it is you. There's nothing about you that's scary. And you get to stand up and be whoever you need to be in order to make the biggest impact that you can make.
I think you couldn't have named it that back at the beginning when you started. It required this time and focus and understanding of what was working. And it's really the right name for the show right now. And especially in the format that it is and the style of what you're doing.
Thank you. I felt much smaller at the beginning. I felt much more apologetic. So, like I said, it's a personal growth journey that's kind of documented in the public, which how many of us business owners don't do that? But I really did need the maturity and the understanding and the back and forth and just the hours under my belt to be able to do that. So thank you.
Well, you've done that. Andrea Johnson, stand tall and own it. Amazing podcast. Everyone out there, you need to subscribe and listen. I'm going to come back with a couple of closing thoughts about some things and make sure that you have connection to that core values. Andrea has been so great to gift that to us as a connection point for you to check out more, because I think some of those might be really helping you understand if you're out there trying to figure out what your core values are and how that is going to create a better intention with your podcast. You're going to need to connect up with Andrea.
Please do. I look forward to it.
If you take away nothing from this conversation with Andrea, and I'm sure you're going to have a ton of takeaways, right? I mean, you probably wanted to be making notes, but don't worry. There's always a blog post for this episode, right? And our blog posts are no longer at thebingefactor.com, although you can go there and you can kind of forward on, but they're at podcastersunited.org. So if there were some things that touch points, things you wanted to remind yourself about what Andrea said, go there. Definitely go there to the blog post for this episode. But if you take away nothing else but the essence of what she was talking about today, that when we create intentionality in what we do, when we are intentional about our podcast, when we are intentional about how we lead, when we are intentional about the message that we're bringing to the world, when we are intentional about who we are and what we bring into that world, there's nothing that could stop us. That is a powerful place to come. And I can tell you from personal experience that intention is everything in creating the ability for you to want to take action. Because when you really know what you want, when you know what your intention is for something, it's so much easier to take action. But I also know that coming from a place of intention makes it easier for me to be creative. Makes it easier for me to be innovative, makes it easier for me to get my team to follow me. Intention is the crux of all of that. So when you are going out into the world and you're putting out your podcast here, let's be intentional about it. Let's see what we can do if you put in, like Andrea's, a year of concentrated intention on your show, how much it will change. How much value it will start bringing, how much it is going to draw in and change things for you in your focus with your audience, in its results that it creates for you. Think about that. Think about your podcast not just being this thing that you do, but this intention of what you're putting out into the world. Don't forget to go check out Andrea Johnson's podcast, Stand Tall and Own It. Go check out what's going on there. And don't forget, she also offered us to give her core values exercise. So that's going to be linked for the blog post in this episode at podcastersunited.org. So make sure you come check that out. Thanks everyone for listening. I'm Tracy Hazard, and I'll be back here next week with another great podcast host for us to learn from.
You've been listening to the Binge Factor podcast. For more information on podcasting and videocasting success tips and tactics, please go to thebingefactor.com. And be sure to listen to our other show for podcasters called Feed Your Brand. If you'd like to be interviewed on this show, as well as featured in Tracy's column, please go to thebingefactor.com/guest and apply.